Sieges. The taking of another's land by brute force. In Total War Warhammer, sieges are pretty simple, but you need to understand what's happening to really be able to apply your units most effectively. So in this guide, we're going to break down how siege battles work and all the things that you need to think about. To begin, we first have to understand the phases of a siege battle. So, Phase 1, the approach. The attacking army will move up with their siege equipment and attempt to assault the walls whilst avoiding as much damage as possible. The defending army will try to do as much damage as possible and prepare for the incoming attack. This will lead to Phase 2, the walls. Both armies should be trying to get the best unit matchups they can. It's not always easy and it's not always possible, but you have to try and win as many small victories as you can. If you win on the walls, you put yourself in good stead to win the entire battle. And then we end on Phase 3, the push. Whether this is the attacking army pushing through, destroying all the enemy units, or pushing through to the victory point, this phase is where the battle ends. From a defensive point, you're trying to push the enemy back and stop them from advancing. So let's begin with what the main goal is for both armies. So much like the rest of the game, everything is about the matchups that you get with your units, whether you're an attacker or defender. So how can we do this? How can we control the matchups? Well, let's start with the attacking side. So you can see here at the bottom of my towers, I've got a selection of different units ready to go. All I'm going to do is check each of my towers matchups on the wall and see if they need help. Graveguard don't need any help with Orc Boys. Skeleton Warriors, they got Night Goblins and Orc Boys. They might need some help because they're a bit outnumbered. So what I'm going to do is take these Graveguard, regular Graveguard, non-armor piercing because they don't need the armor piercing, and send them over to help. On this side, Skeleton Warriors getting into some Orc Boys. They should be okay-ish, so they can take on the Orc Boys, but there's some Black Orcs on the way. They're of course going to get destroyed by Black Orcs, so I'm sending over some armor piercing Graveguard to help them out. You see, I'm just applying my units where they're going to be needed. These Skeleton Warriors are struggling here, so I'm going to send up some Graveguard to help them out. It's just about supporting the troops that are going to need it. If you just send everyone up and send anyone to go in any old tower, there's a good chance you're just going to get bad matchups and lose, and there's really no point in doing that. The Total War Warhammer sieges are meant to be more focused on wall battles. That's why it's so important to get this right. Of course, you can try and adjust your siege tower so that they land in a better matchup, but because they're so slow and clunky, that's not always possible. So this tactic, having reserves and sending them where you need them, is much better. Another tactic you can do if you get a unit past the walls and you get them over, you could then send them around to flank and help out other units like these Kern Wraiths here. As I said earlier, winning on the walls puts you in good stead to win the entire thing, so it's very important that you do your best to try and do as much damage on the walls as you can. So flanking, even with these Kern Wraiths, is not a great matchup for them to be fighting lowly armoured units, but it's better than nothing. And there isn't really a lot of Black Orcs or anything around for them to attack, so we're going to help out these Skeleton Warriors and Graveguard and clear a path for them. Now let's have a look at the defending side. So it's pretty much the same sort of deal defending. I've got all these units down here in reserve, and then up on the walls I've got just my Skeleton Warriors, so I can be ready to apply my units where I need them. In the towers it's Orc Boys and Nasty Skulkers, none of which should provide a major problem for my skeletons, but I am going to send up some Graveguard to support because I want to tip the fight in my favour. Of course, I do have to be ready for the enemy to counter my matchups, as they do have Black Orcs and Big Uns behind the towers, so they're going to send them up inevitably, so I've got to be prepared for them. I've got some Kern Wraiths and some Graveguard with great weapons back here, so those Black Orcs should be quite easily dealt with when they do come up. For now, I'm going to send everything in. Those Nasty Skulkers are gone already. This is definitely not their kind of fight, so they didn't do very well. But you see the Big Uns are arriving now, and the Black Orcs on the left are coming, and the Black Orcs on the right are coming. So, this is where I need to get busy and apply those armor-piercing units. So, Great Weapon Graveguard on the way to deal with the left Black Orcs, and Kern Wraiths on the right to deal with those right Black Orcs. So you can see I'm just doing exactly the same thing that I did on the attacking side. I'm just looking for the matchup, seeing if it's in my favour, and if it's not, I'm going to try and do something to counter it and change it and put it in my favour. The more of these little encounters I can put in my favour, the more likely I am to win. I'm pulling my Skeleton Warriors back now because there's no need for them to be there now. I've got plenty of Graveguard to deal with the Black Orcs. Skeleton Warriors are just going to get chewed up, so might as well save them for another day. And I've got this entire little assault under control. I've got them surrounded. I've got some of the units wavering. You can see how good application of your units is very important. It's the same as land battles. This is what you should be doing in a land battle. Sieges in this game are pretty much just land battles with walls in the way, I think. There's not really a lot you can do tactically though, which you can do in land battles, so it's pretty much just a case of mashing the right units into each other. One last clip to try and hammer this point home, as this is a perfect example. Here I've got Black Orcs against Swordsmen. Black Orcs will destroy Swordsmen every day of the week, but the enemy is sending over some great swords. This will then tip the encounter in their favour. They'll be outnumbering me and they'll have the armour piercing greatswords. So if I do nothing at this point, then my Black Orcs are going to lose. They're outnumbered and they don't have a lot of health. They will take a lot of lives with them, but they're still ultimately going to lose. So I need to get them some help. This comes in the form of Orc Boys who I can flank round with and get in the back of these greatswords and these swordsmen. And this is going to help save the Black Orcs. And as Black Orcs are such an important unit for me because they're one of my best, if I can keep them alive to the late game, they're going to be very useful for mopping up those low morale units at the end. So with all that under our belts, let's have a look at some of the tactics we can pull as an attacker or defender. So as an attacker, the first thing you should be thinking about is how can I avoid as much damage as possible on my approach. There's only really one way you can do this, as the enemy arrow towers can hit you from anywhere, and that's simply to have your units on foot follow behind your towers, because the towers will absorb any missiles that come their way and thus they won't get hit so much, avoiding damage. Of course your towers can be stopped and broken, and if they are, the unit inside will be damaged, so be aware of this, and sometimes it's a good idea to just pull the unit out. Gates, very often of course taken down by battering rams, but you can use pretty much any unit to cut through gates and they'll get through eventually. Monsters can be a good choice as they're pretty strong and pretty fast. However, do be aware of what's on the other side of the gate. In this case there's 3 units of halberds, so I'm going to pull my crypt horrors back as I do not want my crypt horrors fighting halberds. They will get thoroughly slaughtered. So instead I'll send in my generals and all my grave guard and they'll sort out the halberds and then the crypt horrors can come in. Much like the walls, you're trying to get good matchups. Don't just charge at whatever's on the other side of the gate without thinking. Do be careful moving your monsters up to gates however, as they are big targets and they can get easily taken down if there's nothing else for enemies to shoot at, so use them wisely. As for cavalry in sieges, they are near useless, especially on smaller maps. Bigger maps you have a bit more room to manoeuvre and maybe you can make use of them. But for the most part, if you have a cheap cavalry or useless cavalry, you can use them as a distraction and have them draw all the enemy missile fire, thus protecting your towers and your infantry. Artillery, things like mortars that can fire straight over walls can be useful in the same way as they always are, but most artilleries are great for taking down walls. Smashing a massive hole in the wall gives you a new point of entry and potential tactical advantages. It can take quite a while to bring a wall down though, so how much money you should spend on artillery to do this is up to you. It can be good for saving your long beards from squeaks though. Missile units, much like cavalry, are of limited use on the approach. If you can get them inside and up on the walls however, they can rain down on enemy units to great effect. Just be wary of how much you spend on them. Now, time for an important one, so listen up. Don't use ladders. It's quite simple, don't use them. The only time you can use ladders is when there's no one at the top of the ladder and you can have a rest. The reason is, as you might have guessed, using ladders will eat up that unit's vigour. You see how this unit is active, these Ungor units are active? Well, the longer they spend climbing these ladders, the more and more tired they become. They go from active to winded, and then by the time they reach the top, they're very tired. If this was a melee unit and there was an enemy melee unit at the top of the ladders, I would be at a huge disadvantage and it'd probably get me chops kicked off. So ladders are really just a last resort, or if you can have a rest at the top, then it's all good. A sneaky tactic you can pull is to have a sort of infiltration unit, a lone rogue unit that you're basically trying to sneak in the back door. With any luck the enemy won't see them, especially if it's a unit that has stalk. However, it's kind of a win-win because if they do notice you, they'll send units over to engage you, and that's going to pull units away from the main assault, which is only going to help you. You can also try the same thing with a lone tower. With any luck you'll go somewhat unnoticed and be able to sneak in to do some damage to enemy units, open gates for your units, perhaps your cavalry would be a good way to get your cavalry in, or even make a sneaky rush for the victory point. You'll be surprised how often that works online. No unit will ever compare to the Shogun 2 ninjas though, they were the master of this. They were horrible. I miss you ninjas. As for the push phase, there really isn't a lot to it other than what I've been already banging on about. Getting good matchups. Make sure you get the good matchups, apply your strengths to the enemy's weaknesses, and you will surely be victorious. Sometimes though, army composition will dictate who has the advantage right off the bat. So if you're an attacker and you feel like you're at a disadvantage and that you probably can't wipe out the entire enemy army, sometimes going for the victory point may be the smarter move. Now for some defending tactics. A good simple one is to have all of your melee infantry off the walls maybe your skirmishers up on the wall at first, and then you can just apply the melee infantry as you can see what comes in. Kinda like what we were doing earlier. So I see Chaos Warriors coming in on the right, so I'm going to need some armor piercing to take them down. Beast of Gore Herd go over there. And then the other two towers is Chaos Marauders with great weapons. Some Gore Herd and Ungore Herd should be able to take them on, and I've set myself up for some good matchups. Of course, be sure to pull your missile units back in plenty of time, and have your melee units ready to engage. Do of course be prepared for other units to come up the tower though, as you don't want to be caught out not having enough units to deal with all the enemies coming up. You can also do a similar thing with the gates. Have a look at what's on the other side of the gate. If it's a giant, put anti-large there. If it's a heavily armoured unit, put some armour piercing there. All you're doing is answering the door, so to speak. Do be aware that you can control your defence towers. Simply click on them and then you can choose their target. This is great for hammering at certain enemy siege equipment that you want to bring to a halt, like siege towers with high quality units in them. As you probably know, there's multiple levels to defence towers, level 1 through 4. You basically get better ammunition the higher the level. A sneaky one you can pull with defenders is to use a cavalry to go out and take care of any siege equipment. The AI will very often protect its siege equipment, which makes it difficult to do what you want to do, but online people pretty much never protect their siege equipment in sieges. This means that you can quickly get rid of their expensive artillery early on. A cheap fast cavalry may be a better choice for this. A wise tactic to employ if you feel like you're losing on the walls or that you're heavily outnumbered is to fall back and create choke points. Just think of the movie 300. A small amount of men hold a narrow pass which prevents the enemy from being able to use their numbers to their advantage. On top of this, you can position skirmishers behind it to fire at units on the way in. On top of it even further is to send out a lord or hero to stop this unit, make them fight out in the open in the middle. This will give your missiles a clear shot at the enemy unit, and while your lord or hero will take some friendly fire, they're one tiny man compared to an entire unit, so the missiles are mostly going to hit the enemy unit. Choke points also allow you to create some great opportunities for hammer and anvil. You can really set up some nice traps if you hide some cavalry out the way, wait for them to engage, and smash into the back of them. This of course really works best on bigger maps like this one where there's a lot of room for cavalry to maneuver. So while cavalry can have some use in sieges, you may be better off bringing a melee troop instead. Kinda depends on the map and both factions. Expendable units can be used to great effect to slow down the enemy advances. Charge them out and suicide them to glory to give your missiles and defence towers more time to do more damage to incoming units. Now for a few final miscellaneous tips. First of all, planning. Having some sort of plan in mind is always a good idea. Take a look at your army, take a look at your opponent's army and ask yourself, what are you capable of? Do you have the manpower to wipe out the entire enemy army? Should you make a rush for the victory objective? Should you try to defend and create choke points? Are you going to be able to stay and fight up on the walls? Should you try to attack heavy and break through on one certain side of the fortress? A little bit of planning goes a long way. Flying units. A great resource attacking or defending. They can be great for evening out bad matchups quickly, and of course can fight up on the walls, unlike most monsters. Which leads me to my next point, that walls are a great place to hide from land monsters. If you see one of those big bastards coming your way, run up on the walls and you'll be safe. A good way to avoid a bad matchup. And finally, if you didn't already know, in custom battles and online, the defenders will get less money than the attackers. You can see the attackers get the full funds amount, while the defenders get considerably less, because of course they're in a massive castle. Which makes sieges in this game pretty even. In previous Total War games, people generally preferred being the defender because it was the easier option based on how sieges worked. But in this game, sieges are a little bit more even, so don't think you've got an advantage if you're a defender. You have considerably less money than the guy coming at you does. Bear that in mind. So there we go, my friends, a guide to the world of sieges and besiegement and siegery and siegedom in Total War Warhammer. I hope this has given you a better understanding. I've had a fair few comments to make a siege guide, so here it is. I hope you've enjoyed it, and thanks for watching. I've been Zerkovich, you've been the frickin' viewer. Now go and lay siege to some poor fools.